What happens when a homeless man stands before a judge and she suddenly freezes at the sound of his name? What if that name belonged to the very soldier who saved her brother's life on a battlefield decades ago? This is not just a courtroom drama. It's a story about memory, about honor, and about how a forgotten hero, Staff Sergeant Elias Carter, walked back into justice not seeking pity, but warmth, and received something far greater. If you believe that valor doesn't fade with time, and that we must never stop honoring those who've been left behind, this story will stay with you long after the final word. Stay till the end. Because when the truth is finally spoken, the entire courtroom stands. There are days when a courtroom feels like a machine, cold, predictable, and mechanical. A place where the stories behind the faces rarely matter, where paperwork weighs heavier than people. That morning in Newbridge Municipal Court began like any other, but what unfolded within those sterile walls would leave a permanent mark, not just on the judge's docket, but on the soul of everyone who witnessed it. The man brought in wore no uniform. His shoes didn't match. His wrists were bound in cuffs that seemed heavier than necessary, and the heavy green coat draped around his shoulders swallowed him whole. Graying hair curled beneath a knit beanie, and his face, dark-skinned, drawn, weathered, looked like it had been carved by decades of sorrow. Some eyes in the gallery dropped away. Others, perhaps, judged silently. No one expected to remember him when the hearing was over. The clerk barely looked up. "State your name," she asked. He hesitated just long enough to make the silence feel awkward. Then, with a gravel-rough voice that cracked through the hush like old timber breaking, under pressure he spoke. "Elias Carter, Staff Sergeant, United States Marines." It was barely more than a whisper, but somehow the sound carried. There was a small flicker, a shift in the air, like something ancient and fragile had just been uttered aloud, and the courtroom wasn't quite sure what to do with it. The judge, Olivia Parker, hadn't even looked up yet. She'd been skimming through the thin case file in front of her, a routine glance at yet another name lost in the backlog of low-priority misdemeanors. Trespassing, loitering, resisting arrest. The kind of charges that gather dust faster than sympathy. But as her eyes slid over the printed lines, her hand paused, just for a second. Her fingers froze mid-turn. The color drained slowly from her face like a photograph losing contrast. Her lips parted and her eyes scanned the page again. Elias Carter. She said it in her mind first, then again, not as a legal formality, but as a name that struck something raw. She blinked, heart suddenly pounding, because the name wasn't unfamiliar. In fact, it belonged to a ghost, a legend, a story half remembered but never forgotten. The courtroom remained unaware. The bailiff called out the case. City of Newbridge versus Elias Carter. Somewhere near the back, a young intern shuffled his notes. A police officer leaned against the wall, arms crossed. Nothing about the moment hinted at what was really happening. That in the seat reserved for the accused sat a man who had once dragged a wounded Marine through enemy fire in Fallujah, and then disappeared. Olivia Parker felt her stomach twist. She lowered the file slowly and really looked, at the man before her. He sat hunched, shrinking into the courtroom bench as if trying to disappear into it. His coat, 2 sizes too big, was fraying at the cuffs. His fingers trembled, slightly. His eyes stayed on the floor, but now she saw it. Not the accused, not the statistic, not the case number. She saw the shoulders of a man who once carried others. She saw the hollow gaze of someone who had once looked death in the face and survived. And suddenly, the sterile courtroom lights felt too bright, too harsh, because something had just been unearthed, something that had been buried for decades beneath bureaucracy, memory, and silence. She flipped back to the line in the file that had caught her breath. Staff Sergeant Elias J. Carter, United States Marine Corps, 2nd Battalion, 8th Marines, Honorable Discharge, 1995. Deployment, Iraq, 2004. Fallujah engagement. Fallujah. The name hit her like a gunshot. Her brother's last letter had come from there. So had the story he told about the man who had saved his life, a name he had written with reverence. And now, 2 decades later, that name had just walked into her courtroom. No announcement, no medals, no fanfare, just an old man in cuffs trying to survive another cold night. How many times had he been overlooked? Before this moment, how many doors had closed to a man who once threw himself into gunfire for the sake of his brothers? No one else knew. Not yet. But Olivia Parker did. And for the first time in her judicial career, the judge struggled to steady her breath because Staff Sergeant Elias Carter wasn't supposed to be here. And yet here he was, just another homeless veteran standing trial for trying to stay warm, and the question now wasn't what he had done, but what the system had failed to do for him. Elias Carter sat slouched on the worn bench, arms folded tightly as if bracing against a storm no one else could see. The green coat around his shoulders sagged heavily, a relic of another life, maybe one he no longer believed in. Beneath, the courtroom's fluorescent lights, the lines on his face grew deeper, shadows clinging to every memory that had etched themselves into his skin. A generation ago, he had worn the uniform of a Marine, dress blues, metals polished bright against his chest. That image was gone now, replaced by second-hand clothes from a shelter and boots that had seen more miles of concrete than battlefield dirt. Case 47B, the bailiff called. City of Newbridge versus Elias Carter. Elias rose slowly, painfully, like every joint had to negotiate with time itself. Vietnam first, then Iraq, wars layered atop one another, wounds visible and buried, scars that never stopped bleeding no matter. How many years passed? The prosecutor was young. Clean-shaven, sharp suit, voice like it had been rehearsed in front of a mirror. Your Honor, the defendant has been warned multiple times about loitering behind Jefferson Street Cafe. The business owner has filed 3 formal complaints just this month. He made it sound clinical, routine, as if Elias was just another name to process, not a man clinging to the last warm air vent in a city that had long turned its back on him. But what the prosecutor didn't say, what didn't make it into his tone or his file was this: Elias Carter never begged, never asked for help, never shouted or disrupted. He just sat there, quietly in the alley, trying to make it through one more freezing night. Then came the officer's testimony. A uniformed man with polished shoes and practiced certainty. We found him at 11:45 p.m., behind the cafe. He was asked to leave. He refused. That wasn't the truth. Not really. Elias hadn't refused. He'd simply asked, softly, tiredly, for 5 more minutes to finish the half sandwich that Jimmy, the cook, had slipped him earlier. 5 more minutes. But back then, his voice hadn't mattered. And now, standing in court, it still didn't seem to. The prosecutor continued, "This is Mr. Carter's 3rd citation this year. We recommend 30 days of community service and a no trespass order for downtown." Olivia Parker's fingers gripped her pen. She knew what that order would mean. It would bar Elias from the 4th Street shelter, the only place he could sleep indoors. It would ban him from church meal programs, from public benches near the library, from heat, from dignity. It wasn't a sentence. It was exile. She swallowed, then asked, "Mr. Carter, do you have legal representation today?" Elias shook his head. "My public defender got pulled into another courtroom. Said he'd try to make it back." Her eyes met his. "Would you like to speak on your own behalf?" He nodded slowly, cleared his throat. His voice, when it came, was dry and scratchy, like pages of an old book being turned. "No excuses, ma'am. Just needed to stay warm." Her brow furrowed. "Why that location?" He looked up for the first time. Not at her, just past her, maybe toward a memory. Jimmy, the cook. He leaves food sometimes. Known him since he was a kid. His father. "Served with me." Desert Storm. That sentence landed hard. A piece of the puzzle she didn't know she was solving slipped into place. "And your service?" she asked again, though it was off procedure. Her voice was steady, but something in her eyes had softened. Elias straightened, just a little. United States Marine Corps, 1975 to 1995. Staff Sergeant, 2nd Battalion, 8th Marines, Iraq. He spoke the words like a prayer, not with pride but with reverence, like he was trying to remember the man he used to be. For a moment, the courtroom wasn't a courtroom. It was a battlefield memory. Judge Parker made a subtle mark on the file. Her eyes didn't leave the page. Something she saw in his service record made her pause. But before she could speak, the heavy doors at the back of the courtroom creaked open. A man in a tailored navy suit walked in, moving with quiet urgency. He headed straight for the defense table, set down his briefcase and turned to the bench. "Your Honor," he said, calm and composed. "Alexander Ross, I've just been retained to represent Mr. Carter." Olivia's eyes narrowed. This court wasn't informed of any new representation. "My apologies. It was a last-minute development. I respectfully request a short recess to confer with my client." Elias stared at him, confused. He hadn't called anyone. He couldn't afford to, especially not someone in leather shoes and cufflinks. Ross leaned in, whispering, "I know you didn't call. You won't need to pay. My firm is taking this on pro bono." Elias frowned, then slowly blinked. "Ross," he said under his breath. "Like Parker?" Ross offered the faintest nod. "Exactly like Parker." Judge Olivia Parker didn't say anything for a long moment. Then finally she spoke, her voice clipped, composed. "This court will recess for 15 minutes." She rose and turned briskly toward her chambers. Inside her, everything trembled, and Elias Carter, once a ghost of the battlefield, now found himself standing at the center of a reckoning he never saw coming. The 15-minute recess ticked away slowly, but for Elias Carter, it passed in a blur of disbelief. He sat in the corner of the quiet consultation room, his calloused fingers resting on the edge of the table, still unsure if he was dreaming. The man now seated across from him looked like someone out of another world. Crisp suit, expensive watch, and the easy confidence of someone used to winning in rooms filled with power. Alexander Ross opened his briefcase with a smooth click, then laid out a thin folder. "Let's start with this," he said. "Your service records, your citations, and your current VA status. I've already pulled what I could, but we're going to fix the rest." Elias blinked. "You pulled my records?" Ross gave a nod. "We have contacts, and your name still carries weight, even if the world's forgotten it, but some of us haven't." There was a pause. Elias looked down, ashamed of how much that sentence moved him. "I don't understand," he muttered. "Why me?" Ross leaned back, lacing his fingers together. "Because someone made a promise to you once, and someone else broke it. We're here to fix that. My firm is connected to Judge Parker's family. I clerked for her late husband. When she saw your name, well, she made some calls." Elias frowned. "She remembered me?" "More than remembered." Ross hesitated, then continued. "She's been looking for you for years. There's something about your story she never let go of." Elias said nothing. He wasn't sure what to do with that kind of truth. He'd spent years believing no one remembered, that his name had vanished like vapor, from systems, from minds, from meaning. Ross cleared his throat. "The charges against you are minor, but the consequences, severe. If we don't act fast, they'll cut off your access to shelters, food programs, everything. And we both know that's not just uncomfortable, that's deadly." Elias nodded slowly. "We'll fight it," Ross said firmly. "And we won't just win, we'll restore your name, your record, everything you earned." "Don't want pity," Elias muttered. "You won't get it," Ross replied. "Just the truth. And maybe for the first time in a long while, justice." The door opened. A clerk announced, "Court reconvening in 2 minutes." Elias stood slowly. The pain in his joints flared, but he didn't complain. Ross gathered the folder and offered a reassuring look. "You ready?" Elias didn't answer right away. He looked toward the hallway that would lead him back into that room. back into judgment. But for the first time, he wasn't walking in alone. "Let's go," he finally said. The courtroom settled as Judge Parker returned to the bench, her posture flawless, but her gaze distant. She didn't reach for her glasses right away. Instead, she looked across the room at Elias Carter and the man now standing beside him. Ross addressed the court with calm professionalism. "Your Honor, we are requesting dismissal of all charges against Mr. Carter. We intend to present new context and supporting statements regarding his presence behind Jefferson Street Cafe, including witness testimony that he was given implied permission to remain on the premises." The prosecutor rose, irritation flaring. "Your Honor, while the defendant's military background is admirable, it is not relevant to the current charges." But Olivia Parker raised a hand before he could continue. "I have questions for the defendant," she said, her voice quiet but commanding. "Mr. Carter, your service record notes deployment in Fallujah, Iraq, April 2004. Is that correct?" Elias straightened. "Yes, ma'am, 2nd Battalion, 8th Marines, escort duty for a supply convoy." She paused. "Do you recall an ambush on April 17th, near the western edge of the city?" Something changed in Elias's face, a flicker of memory rising through the fog. "Yes, ma'am. We got hit hard. RPGs, small arms fire. We lost our forward vehicle. A medic went down. An officer, too. Lieutenant Jack Parker?" Elias's breath caught. His gaze narrowed, sharp as a blade. "Yes. Yes, ma'am. Young guy. Brave. Tried to pull the medic to safety. Took a round through the shoulder. Wouldn't stop yelling at me to leave him behind." "And what did you do?" "I dragged him out, covered the retreat, got him to the bird." The courtroom fell silent. Judge Parker's voice softened. "That lieutenant was my brother." Gasps echoed. Even the prosecutor froze. Elias's eyes widened, his mouth falling open slightly. I didn't know." "You couldn't have," she replied. Her voice trembled, but only slightly. "I've never forgotten the man who saved Jack's life. Not for a moment." Elias lowered his head, and for the first time in years, he felt seen. When the courtroom door clicked shut behind her, Judge Olivia Parker let the mask drop. She leaned against the edge of her desk, gripping its wooden frame like it might keep her from falling. 20 years on the bench had taught her to keep emotion at bay. She had ruled through tragedy, corruption, and public scrutiny, and yet nothing had prepared her for the sudden return of a man she thought she'd never see again. Her breath caught as she opened the drawer of her desk, one she rarely touched. Inside was a small envelope, corners frayed, paper faded by time. From it, she pulled out a photograph and a folded letter, worn thin from years of being handled, not often, but always with reverence. The photo was old. In it, a young Olivia smiled wide beside her brother Jack, who stood tall in his Marine dress uniform. His hand rested proudly on her shoulder. The day of his commissioning, the day their parents wept with pride. Beside the photo was Jack's final letter home. Olivia unfolded it slowly, her fingers trembling. "We took heavy fire yesterday near Fallujah. We were pinned down. Medics couldn't reach us. Then Staff Sergeant Carter came out of nowhere, charged into the open, dragged me out while still under fire. I yelled at him to leave me, but he wouldn't. He told me no Marine gets left behind. Not while I'm still breathing." She stopped reading, her eyes glassing over. That letter had arrived 2 weeks before Jack's death, killed by an IED on what was supposed to be a routine transport mission. They had buried him with full honors folded flag in her father's arms, silent heartbreak in her mother's eyes. At the funeral, a Marine she didn't recognize approached them quietly. He said few words, but his presence had meaning. "Your son saved my life," he'd whispered. "I was the one he carried." He never said more. She never got his name. Until now. The knock at the chamber door startled her. She quickly wiped her eyes and replaced the letter. Alexander Ross stepped in. His usual composure was cracked with concern. "Olivia," he said, voice hushed. "What's going on?" She turned the photograph toward him. "This is him, Alex. The Marine who saved Jack. The one I've been trying to find for 20 years. Ross's eyes widened as he stepped closer. "The homeless veteran in your courtroom?" "Yes, that's Elias Carter. Jack wrote about him. I tried to find him after the war, but the Corps said he redeployed. Later, they told me he'd been discharged with PTSD and a traumatic brain injury. After that, nothing. He vanished." Ross exhaled sharply, as if the weight of the discovery hit him just as hard. "He doesn't know who you are?" She shook her head. "I changed my name after law school. Married Thomas Parker. He wouldn't recognize me." Ross sat down slowly. "This isn't coincidence, Olivia. It feels deliberate. Like the universe finally brought him back to you." Nodded faintly. "And now he's standing trial, not for a crime, but for trying to stay warm." She turned toward the window, watching the snow begin to fall on the courthouse steps. Her voice cracked. How does someone who once saved lives end up like this? Alone? Forgotten? Ross said nothing for a while. Then, quietly, "I spoke with him. He's been through hell. Lost his wife while deployed. His VA benefits got tangled in bureaucracy. He worked construction until his injuries made it impossible. Then came eviction. The streets. Survival." She closed her eyes. Jack's words echoed in her memory. "Carter was the best of us. If I can be half the Marine he is, I'll count myself lucky." Ross hesitated, then asked gently, "You could recuse yourself, let someone else handle the ruling." "No," Olivia said firmly, standing straighter. "I let him vanish once. I won't do it again." "There are ethical concerns. There are moral obligations," she interrupted, her voice rising slightly. "Especially to those who gave everything for this country." She took a deep breath and looked at the photograph one last time, before placing it carefully back in her drawer. "Get Colonel Matthews on the phone. Tell him I need a favor. Tell him it's about Fallujah, and it's urgent." Ross nodded, stepping out quickly. Alone again, Olivia turned toward her reflection in the glass. She didn't see a judge. She saw a sister, a daughter, a woman holding grief that never really left. And now, maybe, a chance at redemption. A second chance, not just for Elias Carter, but for everyone the world had quietly let slip through the cracks. 15 minutes later, the courtroom doors opened again. Judge Olivia Parker returned, her steps composed, her expression unreadable. But those who knew her well might have caught the subtle tremor in her hands as she adjusted her robe and took her seat at the bench. What she was about to do was unprecedented, and she knew it. Behind her, 3 figures in military dress entered the room quietly. A full colonel, a master sergeant, and a young corporal carrying a polished wooden case. Their presence caused murmurs through the crowd. The sight of the uniforms was unexpected and powerful. Elias Carter, seated beside Alexander Ross, instinctively stood at attention. Despite the aches, despite the years, the muscle memory of service took hold. His spine straightened, his boots clicked together. Time itself seemed to step back. Judge Parker didn't look at her notes. Instead, she placed her glasses down and addressed the courtroom with a voice that, for once, carried a personal weight. "Before we proceed with this case, I must share something. A personal connection that, until today, I did not know I still carried." She turned to Elias. "The Lieutenant Jack Parker mentioned in this courtroom earlier. That was my brother." A collective gasp rippled through the room. Even Elias's breath hitched. He looked at her fully now, eyes searching, trying to reconcile the woman before him with the memory of a teenage girl who had once waited outside a hangar bay for her brother to return. Judge Parker continued, her voice steady, but her eyes misting. 20 years ago, Jack wrote to our family about a Marine who saved his life in Fallujah. He described you, Staff Sergeant Carter. Said you ran through fire to pull him out. Said you were the kind of Marine he aspired to become. From the gallery, an older man in a Marine League jacket stood slowly. "It's true," he said. "I was there. Carter didn't just save Jack, he saved 6 of us that day. Took 2 rounds doing it." The prosecutor stood abruptly. Your Honor, while we respect Mr. Carter's service, this court is here to decide. But Judge Parker raised a hand, her tone sharp. No, the court disagrees. Mr. Carter's service and what followed are absolutely relevant. She took a breath and gestured to the colonel. This is Colonel James Matthews, she announced. He commanded my brother's unit. He has something to share. Colonel Matthews stepped forward, voice clear, resonant. Staff Sergeant Elias J. Carter, the Marine Corps has been trying to locate you. Under the Veterans Reconsideration Initiative, your record has been re-reviewed. New intelligence regarding your actions on April 17, 2004, confirmed what many in your unit had long believed. The young corporal opened the wooden case. Inside rested a medal gleaming under courtroom lights. The Silver Star you were awarded has been officially upgraded. By order of the Secretary of the Navy Cross is hereby presented to you in recognition of extraordinary bravery under fire. Gasps, silence, awe. The Navy Cross, second only to the Medal of Honor. Elias's eyes locked on the medal. His hands trembled. There must be some mistake, he said softly. I didn't do anything special, I just did my job. No mistake, Sergeant, the colonel replied firmly. This is long overdue. Then from the gallery that same voice rang out again, crisp and commanding. Attention on deck. One by one people rose. Veterans, officers, court staff, even civilians. A silent salute spread across the room. And standing at the center of it all, Elias Carter, a man once forgotten, stood not as a defendant, but as a hero finally recognized. Judge Parker wiped a tear and steadied herself. Eyebrow. Light of these extraordinary developments, all charges against Staff Sergeant Elias Carter are hereby dismissed. She brought down the gavel with finality. This courtroom is adjourned. And as she rose from her bench, the room didn't return to its usual bustle. Instead, it held a reverent stillness, as if something sacred had just occurred. A moment of redemption, a restoration of honor. Elias Carter stood quietly, eyes lowered, hands clenched. Not from shame this time, but from something deeper. Relief, recognition, the slow unburdening of a weight he'd carried for decades. Behind him, the Master Sergeant approached with a tablet. Sir, your disability records have been reassessed. You are now rated 100% service-connected. Benefits are retroactive. Housing, full medical coverage, back pay, all of it. Elias blinked. What does that mean exactly? It means, Sergeant, the man replied, you're finally going home. The courtroom emptied slowly, like a tide pulling back after a storm. But the energy in the room didn't leave with the crowd. It lingered, reverent, electric, humbling. Staff Sergeant Elias Carter remained in place longer than anyone. Not because he had to, but because he needed to. Ross stood beside him, gently placing a hand on his back. Ready to go? He asked. Elias nodded, but his eyes were still fixed on the wooden case now in his hands. The Navy Cross shining back at him like a memory finally made whole. Outside, snow had begun to fall again. It dusted the courthouse steps in soft silence, as Elias exited into a world that, for the first time in years, seemed to make room for him. The next week was a blur. Appointments with the VA, housing support forms, bank accounts reopened, records corrected, back pay calculated. Elias had spent years being invisible. Now people remembered his name. But the moment that changed him most didn't happen in an office or courtroom. It happened one quiet afternoon, inside a modest apartment, part of a transitional housing program for veterans. He stood in front of a mirror, not a full-length one, just a small square bolted to the wall above the bathroom sink. He stared at his reflection for a long time. There were no medals on his chest, no stripes on his shoulders. Just a man, older, scarred, but no longer broken. A knock at the door pulled him from his thoughts. He opened it slowly, and there stood Judge Olivia Parker. No robe, no bench between them. Just her in a navy coat holding a small cardboard box. May I come in, Sergeant Carter? She asked. He smiled softly. Just Elias is fine. She returned the smile. Then it's just Olivia. They sat in silence for a while. The small living room felt too quiet, like both of them were, waiting for a signal that never came. Finally, Olivia opened the box and pulled out a bundle of weathered letters, carefully tied with twine. "These are Jack's," she said. "He wrote us often from overseas. I thought, maybe you'd like to read one." Elias took the top letter, unfolding it carefully, hands trembling. Jack's handwriting stared back at him, sharp, clear, the kind you never forget. "Mom, Dad, I'm okay. We had a close call today, but Carter pulled me out. I owe him my life." The man doesn't know the meaning of fear. He told me no. Marine gets left behind. Not on his watch. I want to be like him one day. Elias's voice broke as he read the last line. He looked up, eyes glassy. "He was a good officer," he said. "Still green, but he cared." "That's rare." Olivia nodded, swallowing the emotion building in her throat. "After he died, I went to law school. The Veterans Court Program, the Housing Initiative. It all started because of the things he wrote. He said the system forgets its own. I promised I'd change that." Elias shifted, uneasy with the weight of legacy. "I'm not a hero," he murmured. "I just did what needed doing." "That's exactly what heroes always say," Olivia replied. She reached into the box one last time, pulled out a photo, one Elias had never seen. It was of Jack, standing proudly next to Carter, both in fatigues, both smiling through the dust and weariness of war. "He kept this," she whispered, "even after he was wounded. Said it reminded him why he fought." Elias stared at the image. "I've never seen this before." "He carried it until the end," she said. Silence settled between them again, but this time it wasn't heavy. It was sacred. "I kept thinking," Elias finally said, "that maybe I didn't save him. Maybe I just bought him 2 more weeks. You gave us those 2 weeks," Olivia said. "Time we never would have had, and he lived those days trying to live up to your example." Elias nodded slowly. Something inside him, something long broken, felt like it had started to heal. "You know," she said softly, "Jack once told me the measure of a Marine isn't what he does when people are watching. It's what he does when no one is." She reached out, placing her hand gently over his. "You lived that, Elias, even when the world forgot. You remembered what mattered." Outside, the snow continued to fall, and inside that quiet apartment, for the first time in years, Elias Carter felt whole again. Not because of the medal, not because of the benefits, but because someone remembered. Someone said his name, and this time, the world listened. 2 weeks later, the snow still blanketed the city, softening every edge, muffling the sharp corners of traffic and time. Inside Elias Carter's apartment, however, it was warm. Not just from the radiator ticking gently in the corner, but from something less tangible: peace. The walls were still mostly bare but not empty. One held a newly mounted shadow box, his navy cross at the center, flanked by his purple hearts, campaign ribbons, and the silver star that had, until recently, told only part of the story. Each medal seemed to catch the light with quiet dignity. Next to it hung a photograph, the one Olivia had given him, Jack Parker beaming beside him in dusty fatigues. They were young, worn by war but filled with something unbreakable. Elias stood before it now, his shirt pressed, his posture straighter than it had been in years. He ran a hand over his chin, now clean-shaven. The apartment didn't yet feel like home. Not completely, but it no longer felt like a stranger's shelter either. There was another knock at the door. This time, when he opened it, it wasn't Olivia. It was Jimmy, the cook from Jefferson Street Cafe. He looked sheepish, a bit overwhelmed, holding a paper bag that smelled of fresh bread and stew. I didn't know where else to drop this," Jimmy said, lifting the bag. "And I figured you might still like the Thursday special." Elias chuckled, that low, gravelly sound rising easily now. "You remembered," Jimmy nodded. "My dad always said, if you ever meet a man named Elias Carter, you owe him everything. Took me years to realize you were him." He hesitated. I never said thank you for what you did for him and for what you did for me. Feeding me when I was a kid, giving us a place to believe in. Elias took the bag not just for the food but for the meaning behind it. You were a good kid, he said. Still are. As Jimmy left, Elias turned back inside, placing the meal carefully on the counter. He didn't eat right away. Instead, he sat by the window, watching the snow fall and thinking about time. How it slips, how it steals, how sometimes, if you're lucky, it gives something back. His phone buzzed. A text from Ross. VA check cleared. Full benefits. You're back. Pay's been processed. We'll handle the rest. You focus on living again. Elias stared at the message for a long time. Then he smiled. Later that evening, Olivia returned, not in formal wear, but in jeans and a coat. She brought 2 cups of coffee and a folder filled with proposals. We're expanding the Veterans Court Initiative, she explained. Your case changed everything. Legislators are listening. They want reform. You started something. I didn't start anything, Elias said. Yes, you did, she replied gently. By surviving, by holding the line, even when no one else could. See you. They sat together in companionable quiet, flipping through sketches for a new center. The Elias Carter Veterans Advocacy and Housing Initiative. A place for those the system forgot. A place where no one would be left behind. As the snow thickened, outside, Olivia reached into her coat pocket and handed Elias one last item. A sealed envelope. What's this? He asked. A commendation. And a handwritten note. From the Secretary of the Navy. Elias opened it slowly, reading each word like scripture. To Staff Sergeant Elias J. Carter, for courage in combat, for sacrifice in silence, and for reminding a nation of the debt it still owes. We remember, and we honor you. His hands shook, not from age, from the quiet, overwhelming recognition that after all these years, his story had not been erased. He looked up at Olivia. Thank you, he whispered. No, she said. Thank you for saving Jack, for saving us all in ways we're only beginning to understand. Elias leaned back, closed his eyes, and let the silence settle over them again. Not heavy, not hollow, just full. In a world that often forgets the UA, ones who carry it someone had remembered. And in that remembering, 2 lives, broken by loss, reshaped by war, had quietly rewritten what justice could look like. They gave him medals, they gave him words. But what Elias Carter had waited for all these years was to be seen. For every veteran sleeping on a sidewalk, for every name forgotten by the system, for every act of courage buried beneath the noise, this story is a call to remember. A reminder that the greatest battles aren't always fought on foreign soil. Sometimes they're fought in silence, waiting to be acknowledged. If this story moved you, don't let it end here. Share it. Talk about it. Reach out to someone who's been left behind. Because sometimes the most heroic thing we can do is simply not forget. Staff Sergeant Elias Carter was never just a name in a file. He was a promise kept. And in the end, so was ours.